Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise with great pleasure to speak on this bill. Home ownership has been the great Australian dream for a long time, and it was Menzies, of course, that great Liberal Prime Minister, who instilled that dream in people. And even today, 85% of people who rent tell us that they want to own their own home. And for a lot of reasons, they can't. And the sad part about it is that so many of them believe that they'll never achieve that. And I think that's a tragedy when I hear people talk about that. It crushes dreams. The problems are that markets keep moving, of course. They can't save the deposit because of the cost of living crisis that we have at the moment. And I can remember in my own life, Deputy Speaker, when I bought my first home at 21. And we had 18% interest rates back then. You're probably old enough to remember that, Deputy Speaker. But we're able to do it on one income with 3 kids, which is really unheard of in today's terms. And again, that's another reason I feel very sad for the current generation, because they face far greater challenges. And my first home was less than 2 years of my annual salary at the time. That would be akin to buying a home today for about $180,000, and that just doesn't happen. So the current generation are doing it tough when it comes to home ownership. And look, I'm happy that the government is actually trying to find ways to encourage home ownership. But again, they have a great intention. And I think, as ex-Prime Minister Morrison said yesterday, one thing we can't argue about is that both sides of the House want to help Australians in their own way. Where we don't agree is on the methodology. And this is one of those classic examples. The other thing that I'm not terribly happy about is that this is something that they talked about the election, and it took 20 months to do something about it. And I've got to say, in my electorate, I've never seen the homelessness situation worse. And I've also talked to many people in construction, and they are saying that the phone stopped ringing last year. So there's no contracts being signed. So many of the homes that are being built now are actually a hangover from the coalition government's time in government, where we had great initiatives to ensure people got into their own home. The focus has been on other issues like the divisive voice referendum and all those sorts of things, but at the end of the day, people need a roof over their head, so that should, to me, be the government's priority at all times. The thing that I have against this particular legislation is it's getting the government involved in people's lives. And I know that socialists and communist parties and all those sorts of things agree that this what should happen, is that the government should be in control of people's lives as much as possible. Well, as a Conservative and someone from the coalition side, I believe in governments making sure that we have supports, but at the end of the day, people should always make their own decisions, and the government should be as involved in their life as little as possible. Partnerships in business is all about partner selection, and partnerships, I can say, having had 5 business partners in my time in small business, are a great thing. I really, really believe in them. And but the challenging part about partnerships, because I know people who haven't had great partnerships in business, is that they've had the wrong partner selection. And one thing is that you've got to have people that are reasonable in partnership together, and they have to share all the costs and, of course, all the profits proportionately to what they invested. And I've got to say that I would be very hesitant to enter into any sort of partnership with any level of government. The other problem with this bill is it's too complicated. It relies also on state and territory cooperation. That is just a recipe for disaster, Deputy Speaker. There are so many unanswered questions on this bill. What I want to know is what happens if someone wants to buy out the government share in the home, either a piece at a time or in whole. How do you set that value? When you have a business partnership, you have a shareholders agreement that spells this out very, very clearly. The other issue is, of course, what if there's a dispute over the valuation? What if the government says, according to our valuers, the property is worth $500,000, and the other partner says, no, well, I think it's worth $600,000 or $400,000, whatever it is. How do we settle that? Now, what lenders have signed up for the scheme? What's the point of offering equity if the banks aren't on board? We haven't heard any news on that at all. What happens with the expenses associated with the home along the way? In a business partnership, these costs are shared proportionately by all the partners. I can imagine if I went into one of the businesses I was in partnership with and I said, look, to my business partner, you can pay all the rents and the wages and you can pay the electricity and the phone, but we're going to share the profit equally. How long do you think we'd be in business together, Deputy Speaker? I would say not long. Because if I'm going to earn the rewards proportionately, I need to pay for the expenses proportionately. It's called common sense and fairness. But this is not the case. So what happens when the rate bills come? Do you send an invoice to the government? Give me 40% of the rates? Stamp duties, land taxes? What about their share of the insurance bill? And then what happens if you improve the property? What happens if you put a pool in? Build a pergola? What happens if you add another room onto the house? You've paid the money, the homeowner, the one in there who owns maybe 60% or 70%, they've paid the entire capital outlay, and yet when that reward is reaped at the end, they'll only receive 60 or 70%, whatever the proportion is, after outlaying 100%. It is completely unfair. The government needs to make sure that they are contributing to these ongoing costs. It's as simple as that. Deputy Speaker, this just shows the lack of general business experience on the other side of the House. They have a few people in there that have been in business, but the majority are not. So I understand why they just cannot figure this stuff out. I get it, because they haven't lived it. And this is the problem when you have governments that are mainly made up of people who are ex-bureaucrats, public servants, union officials, worked in political offices. I don't have any problem with those vocations, but it means that they are not set up and don't have the skill set to be able to make decisions that affect people who aren't involved in those industries. And that's not the average Australian. They are supposed to be a party that represents the average Australian, and they just simply don't. 10,000 places, Deputy Speaker, doesn't scratch the surface. 10,000. In comparison, the past 3 years of Coalition's initiatives have helped 300,000 people to purchase a home. 300,000. Let's talk about the initiatives like we supported 60,000 first home buyers and single-parent families into home ownership through the Home Guarantee Scheme, which included first home loan deposit scheme, the new home guarantee and the family home guarantee. Deposits of as little as 2% allowed so many who went through who want the dream of home ownership, and they thought that that was dead, that dream, and now living that reality of home ownership. And I note that 52% of these recipients were women and 85% of family guarantee recipients were used by single mums. And as a dad who has 2 daughters that are single mums, this is welcome news. These coalition measures ensured that the construction industry was absolutely protected and jobs were assured, with more than 137,000 home builder applications, which generated $120 billion worth of economic activity. We saw in the coalition that state governments were failing people with social and public housing. For example, in Queensland, our home state, Deputy Speaker, between 2015 and 2020, the Commonwealth Government provided $1.7 billion for social and public housing. $1.7 billion. It's a lot of money. And in that time, we had a net increase of dwellings of 241. 241. Just over $7 million per home. I'm in the wrong game. Seriously, $7 million per home. In contrast, the coalition brought out the scheme where we had low-cost loans to community organisations who provided community housing, and that investment was $1.7 billion, and that provided 15,000 dwellings. Now let's compare that. $2.9 billion for 241 dwellings, or $1.7 billion for, $2.9 billion for 15,000 dwellings, at an average of $194,000 per dwelling. 194,000, 7 million, which is a better use of taxpayers' money. And remember, that's what it is. It's taxpayers' money. It's not the government's money, it's taxpayers' money. The Coalition established the first home super saver scheme, which helped 27,600 first-home buyers accelerate their deposit savings through using their super. That's right, their super. Not the industry super fund super, not the government super, their super. Their money. Imagine letting people spend their own money on what they wanted to. Isn't that a foreign concept? How strange. Oh, I'd like to buy a house so that when I retire, even though I might have paid all this money in super, I still don't own a home because I haven't been able to get in the market because I could never get the deposit. So I'm going to go on the pension and be a burden. Well, how about we help them out and get into a home so that they own it by the time they retire and they don't have to go on a pension? How about that? That's a bit of long-term thinking. We can't get involved in that, can we, Member for Casey?
Makes too much sense.
Why would we bother doing that? So you've got to wonder why. The federal government would put out a scheme that state governments have already got. They've already got them. And you know what? The take-up hasn't been completed. So they still, Deputy Speaker, they still have spots available for schemes that are almost identical to this. So the question is, why would you even do that? Why would you already introduce a scheme that states have done that there's already no complete take-up in? Well, of course, the answer is it's all about the headline. Got to have this perception out there, we're going to fix things. But then the devil's always in the detail, isn't it? Correct, lack thereof. Well said, Member for Herbert. It's all about the headline, and it's all about spruiking, look at us, look what we're doing. But in reality, it delivers no help. No help. And that is completely reprehensible. I'm all for supporting the government in any type of initiative that will actually help people. And there has been times when there's bipartisan support on different bills that have gone through. When we're in government, they supported some of ours. When they've been in government, we've supported some of theirs. But where we will not support is when it is not going to cut through and it is not the best spend of the taxpayers' money. And this is one of those cases. It's as simple as that. It is our job to make sure that the government is spending the taxpayers' money wisely. And in this case, they simply are not. So I'm asking the question, why does Labor hate people getting on with their own lives? Why do they? Why do they hate people getting on with their own lives? Why do they have to be involved in it? Why do they have to run people's lives? The greatest gift that you've ever been given as a human being is a gift of choice. And when you take away choice, you dehumanise us. And that is just simply unacceptable. So I say to the government, credit to trying to do something, but please go and readdress this, implement some of the coalition schemes that worked, look at the results and implement things that actually work. I commend the bill to the House.